No spin, no bias, no censorship. I'm Dan Wootton. This is Outspoken, episode number 200. I cannot believe that. And it is a special edition of the show today because we are continuing our countdown of the 50 worst people in the UK today. So you might remember last year featured James O'Brien, Gary Lineker, Dr. Scholler top of the list. However, the past year has seen a huge amount of change in the United Kingdom, so the brand new list is currently being unveiled. On yesterday's show, we saw the likes of, we saw the likes of David Tennant, Steve Bray, Humsey Useless, Sheila Fogarty, Hugh Grant, all make the first list, but now, with Alex Phillips, we will be counting down number 40 to number 31. The only rule, by the way, is that the entrants must be living primarily in the UK, meaning that well-known expats like Prince Harry and Shamima Begum miss out, unfortunately. While I've got your attention, though, to get the latest breaking news, join a thriving community and communicate with me directly, please sign up to my Substack, www.outspoken.live. There is a completely free option, and this is, trust me, the best way to protect me against big tech censorship and ultimately cancellation. You know how much they want to shut me up. I really do need you to sign up. It only takes 1 minute. I promise I don't spam you in any way, but it does mean so much to me. www.outspoken.live. But now, let's go. A new entry at number 40 on our list of the worst people in the UK today in Ed Balls, the Good Morning Britain propagandist. Now, the deep state censorship tool, the off-communists, have worked wonders to see GB News cucked and its outspoken presenters silenced. But they have no problem with this failed politician literally interviewing his own wife. Yes, during disgusting controversies over the past year, like Labour's Southport massacre cover-up, he lobbed softballs at his bed buddy Yvette Cooper with Susanna Reid nodding pathetically along. Don't even get me started on his centrist dad podcast with George Osborne. But Alex Phillips, great to see you, by the way. I guess in some ways this might be unfair on Ed Balls, the human being, right? Because for me, his entry on this list is all about double standards in the media. Like, how on earth is it possible for someone like you to be silenced during the election campaign, for someone like Nigel Farage to be constantly under attack because of his role on GB News, yet Ed Balls is literally allowed to interview his wife? It's nuts.
Yeah, but this has been the case for a long time. What's good for the goose isn't good for the gander.
Yep.
In terms of if you're left wing, the rules just don't apply to you. And the same is true with people who are in the sort of commentariat in circulation. I think of people like Alastair Campbell, who lost his rag at me once on Newsnight, almost came to blows, is a bully, an ex-alcoholic, a very unpleasant man, a man who's proven to have lied, a man who, frankly, allegedly could be held culpable for some pretty serious accusations, and yet he's paraded around the commentary circuit like a prize horse. And it was fine, wasn't it, when David Lammy had his show on LBC? That's okay, nothing to see here. But as soon as people in the right wing get to go on the airwaves, because of course for a long time Brexiteers were just crowded out, they weren't allowed, they were untouchables, they were ostracized from mainstream media. But as soon as, you know, the TV execs suddenly thought, well, hold on, our audience rather like this Brexit business, our audience quite like right-wing people, our audience are tuning out from the centrist dadism, let's get some of these folk from the other side on. Wow, all of a sudden then there needs to be extra regulations to make sure dangerous people like us are not allowed on the airwaves. And so in theory that should have provoked a massive problem for someone like Ed Balls, who isn't just himself a former shadow chancellor. That's not just being elected, that's an extremely senior position in a political party, a position he held for a very long time. But he's married to the current Home Secretary. He still goes to things like Labour conference. And yet I went to the Reform rally on Friday Could I speak at the rally? No, because my own employer would be subject to a massive headache from Ofcom if I then went to present my programme. So it is about the duplicity and the hypocrisy of the media, where they will come up with a load of rules and regulations to stop politicians from being on the airwaves, but only if those politicians have the politics that they fundamentally disagree with.
Totally. But the thing is, Alex, the off-communists, right, are just a tool now to shut down dissenting voices, to effectively stop the media turning to the right. But I find it astonishing that when it came to Ed Balls and Yvette Cooper in that interview, they didn't even investigate.
They're not even investigating.
No.
I mean, that's just shocking, isn't it? Because that's clearly compromising. That's
because there were thousands of complaints, because for once the right sort of did the same thing that the left does, Alex, right, and were like, oh, let's organise and let's get the complaints in. But it didn't matter because they just ignored all of the complaints and didn't even bother to investigate.
No, and this is always how it works, isn't it? And I'm glad you pointed out that the right were doing what the left do, because it isn't necessarily Ofcom themselves who suddenly trigger these investigations. The left are very good at weaponising anything, using litigation, using regulation, using, infiltrating systems, complaining to the police if someone's done something. This is very much in their playbook, which is why when people on the right wing pop up on television, there's a slew of complaints because they have an army of people ready to lodge those complaints, which isn't something the right wing tends to do. But it's utterly ridiculous that it wasn't even investigated, because if it had been investigated, it's quite clear he was interviewing his own wife. I mean, that really cannot be regarded as neutral, and especially during the time of a political campaign, and not just we're talking about a very senior politician, not some sort of man interviewing his local councillor wife or something like that. We're talking about this actually very much affecting politics, because her position is so senior and his show has a big legacy audience.
And at the time, by the way, they were speaking, I'll never forget it. I will never forget the interview, because it was during the so-called riots after the Southport massacre, and the point of the interview, and they literally admitted during the interview that they had been discussing this at home, so effectively pillow talk in bed, and it was all about, we've got to crack down on social media. That was the narrative. So it was effectively like an anti-free speech sort of thing. And indeed, we now learn that Yvette Cooper knew a hell of a lot at that point about Axel Rudakabana, about the truth of that man, that terrorist, that she was hiding from the public. So a lot of those people who were so-called rioters, many of whom were not violent at all, were actually correct in terms of what they were protesting about. But anyway, let's not get onto that. Let's move on in our countdown to number 39, a new entry from the professional victim, Ava Santina. Now, this man-hating MSN political pundit claims to be a dyed-in-the-wool lefty. That was until Lawrence Fox said he didn't want to shag her on my former GB News show, and she took the money to pose for a Daily Mail front page calling for the full-on censorship of the British media. By the way, I stand by the fact she is beautiful. Saying so doesn't make me a misogynist. I was just trying to provide a little bit of balance, But I think, to me, Alex Phillips, Ava Santina represents this new breed of the left-wing commentariat who I think are going to struggle in the independent space, because the moment the Daily Mail opened their checkbook, there she was.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, isn't it, about the left wing? They're suddenly realising that their views aren't particularly popular anymore, that the general public aren't really interested in them. If it wasn't for the sort of sympathetic appointees and the czars in legacy media who push them and promote them, they wouldn't really have public-facing careers, because in and of themselves, they're hardly sort of, making moves and tearing things up and garnering a huge following. And yet they still need to earn their keep, don't they? And it's amazing how many Damascene revolutions there are along the way, with people who suddenly go, well, I used to think this way, but actually the scales have fallen from my eyes, and people who are suddenly adopting a more right-wing approach because it's the new rock and roll, because it suddenly is proven to be popular, proven to be where the market's at. I mean, look, Ava in and of herself, a nice woman. I've met her plenty of times. She's always friendly to get along with, but she is symptomatic of a huge problem we've had for a long time, which is this sort of lionization and beatification of people on the left wing. There's a guy at the moment, I can't remember his name, but he's a sort of former banker and now he's a socialist. And you can almost hear the gears, grinding away as they desperately try and pump this man out onto every channel and every platform because he says things like wealth needs to be redistributed. The wealthy people need to be taxed more, despite, suddenly coming to these revelations after he himself has made millions. Because it's just they can't help getting off, they don't get off their ideological juggernaut, do they? They have to, ram raid us constantly with their broken belief system that people now can see has devastated the world. Ava, like anybody else, has got to make her money, and I think marketing forces are now dictating that money isn't in leftism.
Well, no, indeed. I guess I would just say, in terms of my personal experience, that the only reason that discussion with Laurence Fox took place at all on GB News is because she had been so dismissive on the concept of there needing to be a minister for men, so dismissive of the shocking suicide statistics when it comes to men in the United Kingdom. And I do think she wants to be a professional victim because, of course, the pressure that I came under and everything, Alex, and I attempted to contact her and she just wasn't having it. So I think she used that situation. But look, let's move on in our list to number 38. And it's Jonathan Reynolds, a new entry for the lying business secretary. And look, of course, the UK's incompetent Labour cabinet would hire someone for the business brief, Alex, who couldn't even be honest about his own CV. And let's be honest, his mortifying apology for lying about being a solicitor should have immediately resulted in his resignation. But of course, the corrupted MSM let him get away with it because he's one of their guys. He has zero business experience, but his wife is a key advisor to Slippery Starmer. And I think, look, he made a big mistake. He apologized for it, but no one in the MSM would ever have allowed a Conservative minister to quite literally mislead Parliament about what their job had been, Alex.
Yeah, I know. It is actually ridiculous. I mean, at least we don't really stand much chance of getting accused of libel by him because he never even became a solicitor, did he? But this is the thing.
He didn't see it through. And you know why he didn't see it through? Because he was one of those young political people, who just got a gig very early on, didn't want to be in the real world, Alex.
And did you know not a single cabinet member at present has ever run a business? Not one has ever been in the private sector or run a business, which says a lot, doesn't it? But it is, again, symptomatic of this sort of two-tier system, the system where if you do something on the right wing, you're terrible. People are going, resign, resign. When are you going to resign? Are you going to sack him? But you don't hear those same questions and challenges being put towards the Labour Party. And when you see of the things that are going on, Rachel Reeves' incredible CV, his completely made up baloney CV, some of the other, behaviours of people in that cabinet, and no one ever says, oh, are you going to sack him? Are you going to resign? Is he going to be replaced? Did he lie to Parliament? And these people, worst of all, are just downright incompetent. They can't even lie very well. So again, it's another symptom of a far bigger problem that we have, which is the fact that leftism is constantly associated with goodness, with fit for government, with righteousness, with moral rectitude, and usually it's none of those things.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. But of course, the business secretary is just a political activist, right? A political activist who very briefly trained in Manchester as a junior solicitor. I mean, isn't it astonishing that out of all of their hundreds of MPs, virtually all of them are just dyed-in-the-wool Labour activists, and that's why they got their jobs. And I believe, Alex, that's why the country is in deep, deep trouble. But moving on in our list to number 37, and she's plummeted 10 points from last year. This is Sangita Myska, the race-baiting axed LBC loudmouth. Now, the hard left broadcaster has fallen down the list this year because she was axed, of course, from her show on the Labour Broadcasting Company. Why she was axed depends on which nasty lefty you believe. Her allies say it was for her anti-Israel interviews. while her former colleague, James O'Brien, insists her ratings were actually really bad. How kind of him. But she still operates in a new lefty gang, including fellow axed LBC host Carol Vorderman and axed GB News pundit Narinder Kaur. And so, of course, when she lost the LBC show Alex, she did fall down the list because she has lost a lot of her influence on the left. She hasn't launched anything successful independently. However, it is very, very interesting, isn't it? How a bit like on the right with GB News, you're only allowed to operate within a certain Overton window.
Right, exactly. And isn't it funny how when they get booted out because they don't perform very well, they all sort of gang up together and decide they're booted out for other nefarious reasons. So it must be targeting them because they're a woman, or, you know, they can't get rid of that sort of victim status. And good. It's nice to see the world healing. It's nice to see sort of human nature winning the day at large when all of a sudden you realise that the companies are now turning around and, do you know what, Dan? I've heard gossip actually that Global have looked at their lineup and gone, this isn't where the audience is at. We need to start getting people on board with different politics other than just Nick Ferrari. We need to get people who represent the wider worldview. They're looking at election results. They're looking at polling, suddenly going to saying we can't stick our heads in the sand anymore. And farewell to these people who once got paid ludicrous sums of money for being not very intelligent, not very entertaining, and in no way in touch with the people of Britain. It's great to see finally that this automatic accelerants, this automatic promotional opportunity or upper hand that people got simply for being Labour or left wing seems to be beginning to crumble.
And I think this is going to happen more and more, right, Alex? Because we are seeing a complete failure by the left-wing media to hold the Labour government to account. And indeed, I actually think it's something the right-wing media was pretty good at when it came to the Conservatives. So, for example, I think of my time on Talk Radio, and all of the Talk Radio presenters at that point, you know, Julia Hartley-Brewer, Mike Graham, we were hammering Boris Johnson over lockdown every single day. We hammered Theresa May over Brexit every single day. But they're so tribal that this government, which, let's be honest, has done appalling things, is not being held to account by the left-wing media. And so I think the ratings will keep going down.
Yeah, not before the election, not since the election. And it won't happen because, you know, sadly, a lot of people in legacy media, in order to get to those positions, they had to go to the best journalism schools. To go to the best journalism schools, they had to have gone to the best universities. To go to the best universities, they had to have gone to the best schools. And then to get into the profession, it's so nepotistic. You have to know people who work in a newsroom to get a leg up. So it's always going to be children of politicians, children of other broadcasters. And so what happens is you get a load of people who they live in an echo chamber. The only people they ever meet have exactly the same politics as they do, and they're not exposed to the real world. I don't know the last time an actual BBC correspondent or LBC presenter found themselves having fish and chips on a seafront or going to a Wetherspoons for an all-day breakfast or a mixed grill. I mean, they kind of regard people in the sort of huge underbelly of society, the majority of people who are the working classes and the lower middle classes, as disgusting aliens. But at the end of the day, that's your audience. That's real Britain. These are people who we know, Dan, and who we love and who we represent, because these are the people who stand up and represent the country, fight for the country, keep food on shelves,
Totally.
Farmers in fields, you know, factory workers on production lines. That is what Britain is.
Totally, real Britain. And you're right that they're not doing that, Alex. Instead, they're at Soho House having a quinoa salad with vegan tofu. And that is the ecosystem in which they operate. Let's continue our countdown, though, of the worst 50 people in the UK today. And a new entry for 2025 at number 36, Lewis Goodall, the fake news agent's third wheel. At the British Bashing Corporation and Sly News, Goodall was always a left-wing propagandist rather than a journalist. Now unleashed alongside John Sopel and Emily Maitlis, his gaslighting of his gullible audience continues at a fevered pace. Goodall has spent the year ignoring Labour scandals and incompetence to bitch incessantly, Alex Phillips, about Donald Trump and Nigel Farage while Britain burns.
God, those three just make me feel sick to my stomach. I mean, I don't know which one's worse. On any given day, it's like, oh God, is it the sort of annoying, pompous, never correct on anything BBC career lasted way too long for a man of so little talent, John Sapel? Is it Emily Maitlis, who would claim credit for sort of, landing on the moon given the opportunity, who just seems to be a failed marathon running, limp-haired lunatic? Or is it this sort of Robert Preston wannabe, I'm a young academic with my tortoiseshell glasses, he's probably got elbow pads on, overly promoted because he represents a particular narrative, Lewis Goodall? Now, Lewis, again, in real life, I've met Lewis a number of times and I get along with him very well. He's a nice guy. But this is what happens. The BBC or Global or whichever mainstream outlet it is, whichever big sort of news core it is, suddenly pick their person that they want to push and promote because they know that they are the sort of, they can turn them into the poster boy of their ideology. And that's what they've chosen in good old Lewis. Lewis is a competent journalist and a nice man, but I fear in the hands of Global's sort of a megalomaniacal approach to podcasting and wanting to sort of change the world one program at a time to turn everyone into a rabid lefty, he's sort of becoming their performing monkey. And it doesn't suit him because actually when he was with Sky, he actually, proved himself to be very competent.
The thing is, though, Alex, it's about where his heart is. And of course, he's worked for centre-left think tanks. He's worked for the Democrats in the US. And I think what the news agents or the fake news agents are trying to do is bring MSNBC-style activist journalism to the United Kingdom. Now, of course, I find that totally ironic because surely the fact that the three people who are at the forefront of this journalism were all people who just a year ago we were meant to believe would give impartial coverage to Donald Trump and Nigel Farage when they were quite literally covering elections, Alex. I mean, John Sobel covered the entire Trump administration. Goodall was responsible for reporting on those elections on Newsnight, and we know Emily Maitlis was the impartial person on election night who was meant to crunch the numbers in an accurate style. Yet, given your history in UKIP and the Brexit Party, that she was always an activist, Alex. So I find it ironic that they think that they need to bring this here, because my argument would be it's already here. It's been here for the past decade. It's been here since Brexit, because that was the moment, in my opinion, when the BBC went from a broadly centre-left organisation when it came to their news coverage to activists, because they were so truly disgusted by that Brexit result. Sometimes, Alex, for fun, and some people might think I'm a loser, I literally go back and I watch the BBC's broadcast of Brexit because they are in mourning. The night begins with Hugh Edwards thinking there is zero chance, David Dimbleby thinking there is zero chance of the Brexit vote going through. And so you get to watch in real time what they really think. And you'll know those stories. I think it's Nigel actually who spoke of those stories of entering the BBC and seeing staff members actually crying at the result.
It's funny, isn't it? Now they're all supposed to be revolutionaries and independent broadcasters, cutting their way bravely with tenacity in the independent digital world. How the mask has slipped on legacy media, because these people couldn't wait to be able to come out of their closet and profess themselves as being rabid lefties. Although, by the way, it was clear all along that you were. But it's sad.
You weren't fooling no one, Goodall.
Exactly. But what's so sad is these people, these supposedly independent podcasts have got the same big bucks behind them, the same multinational corporations using their slush funds to try and occupy the podcast space, pretending it's all independent and new and revolutionary. It isn't. These are the same corporations that have dominated linear television for so long. It's constantly, the big money is always put behind this sort of saccharine, nauseating, vacuous, unintelligent leftism that seems to hamper every single aspect of UK existence.
Alex, I am so glad you have made that point, because I do think it's really important that people actually understand that there is nothing independent about the fake news agents. They are not independent journalists. They are part of Global. They are part of LBC. They have the same big advertising units selling their wares to big time corporations like the Microsofts, like the Bill Gates, which is why they get people like Tony Blair and like Bill Gates on their podcast. There is nothing independent about them. Indeed, the only reason they actually left the BBC was because the new Director General, Tim Davie, and credit to him, although I think he failed, if I'm honest, but was trying to crack down on the politicisation of BBC News. Do you remember she had to apologise, Emily Maitlis, for her unhinged rant against Dominic Cummings, which is just totally inappropriate at a public service broadcaster that is not meant to be coming at us from a political position. So they are not independent. They might claim they're independent. They're not even slightly independent. And it's a totally different thing to what you're doing, to what I'm doing, which is cutting free and breaking loose of all of those institutional structures so that we can just broadcast the truth without bosses telling us what to do, and actually critically without advertisers telling us what to do.
Yeah, and actually doing it under our own steam, with our own energy, with our own courage, our own convictions, and our own cash. You know, we don't need puppet masters. We're prepared to take the leap of faith and do what we think we should be doing on behalf of the general public. These people are just forever employees of the deep state and of multinational big tech companies, doing their bidding because they want the world to stay exactly as it's always been, because they profited so well out of it. And that is just so devastating. The left wing is extremely good at making money, right? You just look at Davos, you look at advertising campaigns, you look at DEI hires. The left wing has actually turned its whole ideology into capitalism, ironically, because it isn't true to its word. It doesn't actually, they're all sort of silver spoon champagne socialists. And the right wing's got to learn how to do the same, frankly speaking.
Yeah, indeed. But I think we're going to do it differently. And I think actually, in the end, even though they're going to throw everything at us, we will hopefully come out on top, because obviously I look very closely at these numbers, and no one is interested, Alex, in watching digital content from LBC or Channel 4 News, or they have this massive institutional advantage because of the decades and decades of infrastructure that used to be required to broadcast. But actually, there is a democratization of the news that is coming, and I think it will be very, very bad for those big organizations. Global, as a company, and Charlotte Gill has been doing great work on this over the past year, is an activist company. They control the advertising in the London Tube network. They are behind controversial issues like assisted dying. And you're right at the moment that might be where the money is. But there is this revolution coming to the media. Yeah. And I think in the end, they will struggle because, Global loses a ton of money every year.
Yeah, not enough, unfortunately, but the revolution is coming. We've got to keep pushing. We've got to keep the MAGA momentum. Because at the end of the day, what we know, and we're talking about it in terms of these people pretending they were impartial and covering elections, and then the minute they sort of get booted out, they go on these far leftist tirades. And you sort of think, well, here comes the mask slipping down again. But we all know what's behind it anyway. So this is why it's so important that true independent media on the right wing does thrive and does survive.
Very well put. At number 35, a new entry for the communist Ash Sarkar. Now, even Novara Media's chief fool tried to get in on the vibe shift caused by Trump's election to claim she was never into all that woke stuff. But Sarkar's pernicious role in warping our culture, because the legacy media became obsessed with giving a gigantic platform to her fringe, anti-white, anti-biological women views, will not be forgotten. And Alex Phillips, I don't necessarily think Ash Sarkar would have made the list until she tried to wash her hands of wokery. And it is utterly nuts.
It really bothers me that all of a sudden now the anti-woke movement is clearly more popular than the woke movement, and the woke movement was never popular, then all of these people who have shilled for the woke movement suddenly want to suddenly go, it was all wrong, I didn't say that, it was terrible to begin with, it's all been used for nefarious ends. And you just think, you don't care, you just want your mug on telly, don't you? You don't have any convictions. You will back any particular ideology or horse if you think that is the successful one, if that is going to give you primacy of position, if that is going to make you money, if that is basically your route to profits. You have no dignity and no integrity. And what's so sad is that the publishers lap it up. They go, oh yeah, who do we want to write about anti-wokeism? Oh yeah, Ash Sarkar, that's one of us. They wouldn't actually dare go to somebody who has been for a long time a voice against the pernicious effects of this sort of brainwashing that's been taking place at corporate level. And all these leftists pretend to be sort of independent, communist, anti-capitalist. They're the most sort of cynical, capitalistic people you could ever meet. They just do everything for money, everything for status. They don't believe in anything at all. If all of a sudden it was decided tomorrow that all dogs in the United Kingdom should be killed, they'd go along with it. And actually, when people go like talk about the far right or talk about fascism, they always pretend it's people on the right wing who have the propensity to go and sort of, goose step and grow funny little moustaches. It isn't. Those aren't the people. Whoever gets sucked into sort of mass hysteria, propaganda, and communal cruelty, it is people on the left. And it's clear that they would just sell their souls and shill for whatever happens to be the most popular opinion of the time without actually any moral scrutiny.
And Alex, as a pro-Brexit campaigner, I'm sure you remember when Novara Media and Ash Sarkar were talking about the unbearable whiteness of Brexit.
Yeah. I mean, look, we all know this, don't we? That the people on the left are the most racist, divisive, unpleasant, nasty, persecutory group of people you could ever find. There she is. Look at her sticking her finger up, thinking she's so great. These people just run on cruelty and bullying and division. And that's all they know. They're just nasty and unpleasant to the core, and they get constant opportunities as a result. And you and I both know, don't we, Dan, that we could have probably joined that brigade. We had multiple opportunities in our career to suddenly
be one, would have been so easy.
My life would have been so much better. When I was at the BBC, if I turned around and said, oh, I love a bit of leftism, refugees welcome, I'd have probably been presenting, Politics Live by now. I had plenty of opportunities to sell out, and I never did. I've always stuck to my core beliefs because I know that they're true and they're worth fighting for. And never has that been more apparent and more critical than today.
Totally. What about her anti-women stance, which I think was absolutely buying into the extreme woke ideology? So, Julie Bindel, who has done incredible work, actually. I don't agree with Julie Bindel about a lot of stuff, but when it comes to her work alongside the likes of J.K. Rowling to speak out and protect the rights of biological women, I am with her 100% of the way. Now, Ash Sarkar described Julie Bindel, you might remember, as an anti-trans bigot. But do you know what for, Alex? She was an anti-trans bigot because she didn't want a man in a female prison. Do you remember that disgusting story of Adam Graham, who claimed to be Isla Bryson? He was a rapist. He is a rapist. And Nicola Sturgeon, because of her woke ideology, was putting him in a female prison. Julie Bindel, for calling that out, was described as an anti-trans bigot by Ash Sarkar. Yeah. I mean, that is so far down the woke rabbit hole. I don't think you can get any further into it.
Nobody hates women more than other women. And this is how left-wing women work. They always sort of act as a herd. They want to sort of be, in the pack, leading the pack, and like ostracizing anybody who is a threat to that. And a lot of the problems we face in modern society when it comes to so-called progressivism is from middle-class women. They are an absolute blight, and it's all sort of part of their female brains and their inherent mentality. It's like trying to have, it's keeping up with the Joneses. It's having the latest designer shoes or the latest, most desirable handbag, flouting around the latest woke ideology. Aren't I wonderful? Aren't I superior? Aren't I more beautiful a person on the inside because I say this? Even if, like I said, it doesn't attribute itself to anything. We're talking about people who just sell out without any moral scrutiny for the sake of earning money. And unfortunately, a lot of what's gone on and taken place in the 21st century is as a result of twisted middle-class women, frankly speaking.
Let's continue the countdown at number 34. Donnachadh McCarthy, a new entry for the climate extremist. Now, when GB News needs a hard left environmental nutter, they now call on this deeply unpleasant man whose views are so extreme that he would bankrupt the country by outlawing farms, enforcing veganism, curtailing cars, and banning air travel. The left somehow failed to be outraged recently when he confused two black conservative former ministers, the ex-Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng and the ex-Foreign and Home Secretary James Cleverly, while appearing as a guest on Farage. Now, just imagine the reaction if Nigel had made the same mistake. And I find this guy, I don't know if you interviewed him on GB News, Alex, but he always used to be offered up, I guess, because we had to do that sort of annoying like balance thing, right? So anytime you would be discussing something to do with Nut Zero, oh, you can have horrible Donnachadh McCarthy on. And actually, I find this guy such a malign influence.
Yeah, a lot of hard leftists are malign influence, and they are just desperate for prominence. These people have some sort of mental condition where they're inherently attention seekers, which is what pushes them to the extremities. They just desperately want me, look at me. I'm going to shout the most radical thing I can. I'm going to sort of have a crazy haircut. I'm going to dye my hair blue. I'm going to wear the most outrageous of clothes, and I'm going to say the most outrageous of things, because it's frankly a form of narcissism. And so when these people, they'll go on any show at all. You invite that man on to sort of naked dating and he'll probably go on it. They'll do absolutely anything for a whiff of attention, because frankly, a lot of them are actually unhinged. And because programs like GB News, channels like GB News are boycotted by the left, but they have to balance off communism, they end up having just the sort of nut jobs from the left that appear on the programs. And like I said, these people should just be institutionalized. There was a point in time where people like him would have been lifted off the street and carted off to the funny farm.
Yes, I think it'd be very well suited there. I mean, Alex, when is the time going to come when the mainstream media realizes that the policies that are being pushed by him, and to be honest, by Ed Miliband too, actually deserve serious scrutiny?
Right. Well, Ed Miliband's the more worrying one, isn't it? Because despite looking like something that's been made by that guy who did Wallace and Gromit,
Wallace and Gromit character, yeah.
And having permanent nasal congestion and standing in a field playing a ukulele, they still take him seriously. And his politics are fanatical. He views climate change with neo-religiosity. To him, it is a cult, and everything is so, important and critical and right now in an emergency. And the media just go along with it. They're like, yeah, fine, let Britain completely self-flagellate at the altar of net zero. Let's completely deindustrialize. Let's become so impoverished that people are living on the streets and having to cannibalize one another. That's okay, because guess what? The world is on fire and only Britain can do something about it. And we were talking about the professionalization of media and all the people coming from the same schools and the same universities, and they've all been brainwashed and fed this stuff for years at university, and to climb up the greasy pole in their careers that they honestly, I think, fundamentally believe in it a lot of the time. But you get no diversity of thought, and therefore no critical examination of what actually are deeply dangerous policies.
And it is dangerous. That is the point, isn't it? It is dangerous. And I guess I'm so critical, Alex, of the fact that the media feels like they don't need to challenge these dangerous policies. And they have partly fallen into that trap, because a lot of people won't know this, Alex. The one issue that the government, that the off-communists say never needs to be challenged, you don't actually have to provide balance on, is the issue of climate change, because they say it's set. And that just shows you, doesn't it, where the establishment are at when it comes to issues of net zero.
Yeah, and you know what? This whole idea that there's any such thing as settled science really gets on my wick at the best of times, because throughout history, people have gone, oh, look, The
The
sun
Earth's
goes.
flat.
That's it. Yeah, done. That's the settled science. Oh, look, this exists. And then 10 years later, someone goes, oh, no, it doesn't. We've actually found out a bit more. Science is the least settled thing on planet Earth. Nobody, there is no such thing as settled science. The point of science is not agreeing and constantly pushing the boundaries and trying to innovate and discover and research and disprove over and over again. And so the more we have this lazy groupthink idea that some things are just settled, the more bankrupt we are as a society and as a culture, and the less able we are to innovate. But the thing is, you just speak to other people in Britain. We all know how bad a situation the country's in. We're in sort of, a doom loop now of decline, which is really hard to see how we're going to get out of it. So many people I'm speaking to, they're having their wages cut, they can't afford their bills, they can't find work, especially the latter category, the sort of wealthy middle classes who have a lot of money and a lot of experience, are fed up with the government, are just leaving because we're just in such gross economic decline with the highest energy costs in the world. Everywhere you look, you just think, how do we resuscitate Great Britain now? And a big part of that has been due to net zero fanaticism.
Yep. And it's not going to get any better while Ed Miliband remains in the cabinet. Potentially, I would argue, one of the most dangerous men in the country. Continuing our countdown now. This is the 50 worst people in the UK today. At number 33, down just one position from last year, Tom Bradby, the Harry and Meghan supporting ITV News presenter. This is the man, of course, who Prince William ghosted for his deranged support of the Sussexes, and he continues as their most senior British media propagandist. To the eternal shame of those managing woke ITV News, Bradby has also moved the apparently impartial bulletin to the left with constant editorialising, especially against Donald Trump. So, Alex Phillips, let's kick off with the royal connection here, because I have a real issue with this. Effectively, Prince William decided, quite rightly in my opinion, that Bradby could no longer be trusted as a friend, given he had so blatantly sided with Harry and Meghan over Megxit. And let's be honest, I think history will judge that to be the wrong decision. I think we all know now that the warnings that William and King Charles and the late Queen Elizabeth II were providing were based on actual experience with Meghan Markle, which has proven to be true. But because William decided to ghost Tom Bradby, and William is a tough guy, when he decides you're out, and Bradby was out because William felt so betrayed. Once that happened, Alex, rather than thinking, okay, I'm a journalist and I'm leading a big news organization, so I'm going to have to make sure I'm balanced on this, he went so far down the Harry and Meghan bias path. It's actually a joke, to the point, I'm sure you'll remember, the ITV chief executive effectively forced Piers Morgan out of the network because of an email sent to her by Meghan Markle. But who was the conduit, Alex, I'm told, between all of that contact? It was Tom Bradby. I don't believe, given they are an off-communist regulated state broadcaster, not like the BBC, but they have to sign up to all of the public broadcasting edicts that give them this huge distribution channel. I would argue that Tom Bradby should actually have nothing to do with the coverage of his BFFs, Harry and Meghan, because how on earth can he cover them impartially? But instead, remember, he did that interview with Prince Harry about Spare, when Harry literally came on television and said, oh, no, we never said that there was a racist within the royal family. And any journalist, Alex Phillips, would have said, you literally said that. And Tom Bradby just sort of nodded along.
Well, again, it comes down to the left wing getting away with things, because the words coming out of Harry and Meghan's mouth were, she's been victimised because she's black. It has to be true. It can't be false. It has to be true treated with kid gloves. It has to be believed in first utterance. They have to be venerated for their courage in saying it. If Prince Harry had turned around and said something completely different, then there'd have been all hell break loose, a load of nonsense thrown at them. Do you remember when Prince Harry sort of, dressed up in a Nazi uniform? But as long as what you're saying is racism is real and dangerous and I'm here to fight it, and you can roll that out to any ism that you like, as long as you're an ismiter and a huge champion of the isms, you'll just be taken at face value and lauded for your courage. And so, Bradby knows which way the wind blows. He's made this special relationship with that couple, giving him unique access. They are clickbait, they do attract a big audience, and he can deliver getting those interviews. And so they want him to stay in the loop. They want him to be part of the team so they can get that special access to a couple who, quite frankly, should be ignored. I mean, what are they doing? They're not working royals, so they don't have any status or, they don't have any privilege. They don't speak on behalf of a country. They're not members of the royal family anymore. They're just two has-beens knocking about in a big mansion in California, desperately trying to grift and make money from, talking about woke topics. They shouldn't really be given the time of day after the things they've said, which have been proven to be utterly false. And yet, they are still venerated by some sections, even though they're broadly very dispopular now, because they're seen to be the people, pushing back because they're the progressive leftists. And like I said, Bradby has discovered that he's one of the few remaining people who will be granted access to them. And so he has to go along and, dance to their tune.
It's sort of like celebrity journalism, isn't it? I remember when it was like, you'll only get an interview with Taylor Swift if you're lovely about her every single day of the year. But I would argue, Alex, this is quite different, given that Tom Bradby isn't even a royal editor. He is effectively the editor-in-chief of ITV News. He sits at that table every night and editorializes quite blatantly, actually, which again, he is allowed to get away with because he's on the left. For example, we've seen all of his negativity about Donald Trump over the past few years. And I just feel like he should have to be honest about the very, very close friendship he has with Prince Harry and Meghan when he is covering stories connected to them. And the problem is you see it through the whole organization, because trust me, Tom Bradby has a lot of power at ITV. I can tell you he was instrumental in my decision to end up leaving ITV. Some folk might remember I actually spent 10 years. It's crazy to think about it now, given how woke they've become. But I spent 10 years on the ITV breakfast sofa, working specifically on the Lorraine Kelly show, where I would cover the royal family. And my coverage of Harry and Meghan was just honest, right? It actually wasn't particularly negative. I just reported the truth of what was going on, because this is all of the time, Alex, of the wedding and then the fallout, right? But because Piers Morgan was on Good Morning Britain and Tom Bradby couldn't stand it, he couldn't stand the fact that Piers Morgan was calling out their negativity, he then tried to silence me. And so I guess what I'm saying is that you've got a very powerful guy who throws his weight around at ITV. And I just wish that he was forced to be honest, because I don't think he does an honest job reporting on them.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it does seem that he is incredibly compromised. But like I said, these people, left-wingism is built upon bullying, really. It's built upon a keeping up with the Joneses. It's built upon this idea that they can intimidate and shut down other people. And they want to keep their own secure, cozy positions of prominence and their big salaries and have people lord over them and venerate them by adopting all of these false narratives, by going along with the trendy issues of the day. And it's funny, isn't it, when it comes to Harry and Meghan, it's not about whether you like them as a couple or dislike them as a couple. It depends what side of that divide you come down on, whether you come down on sort of common sense, honesty, integrity, patriotism, and all of those things, or whether you want to be part of the nasty woke brigade who want to bully, who want to divide, who want to paint themselves as victims, and who want to manipulate.
Indeed. I also do just have to say, though, Alex, it was bad form on his part. Wherever you stand on this issue, William gave Bradby the scoop of his life. Do you remember? It was the engagement interview, the only time him and Catherine, the Princess of Wales, have ever spoken about their love story, and they went into quite a lot of detail about it, actually, was that engagement interview, which was granted to Tom Bradby, gave Bradby quite a lot of his international success and fame. And so I guess what I'm saying is I understand why William felt, put the personal aside, he also felt a professional betrayal too, Alex.
Yeah, indeed. And, I hear this a lot from people who are on the royal beat who go and do coverage of the royal family. And it is a very sort of tight-knit circle. Everyone knows everyone. It's a privileged little club who have access to the royals. And personal relationships and personal friendships are built. And my understanding is Bradby knew those princes from a very, very young age. And so when the two princes fell out and Bradby very much took the side of Harry, that would have felt a bit like almost in a divorce. It would have felt like someone picking sides very personally, I'm sure.
Yeah, it did. And I think it's really important that you raise what Harry has railed against, by the way. It's called the Royal Rota. And I actually despise the way the Royal Rota operates. I don't think it gives proper royal reporting. It was something that when I launched Outspoken, I was very, very clear on. I will deliver the sorts of exclusives that the Royal Rota won't, because the problem is, Alex, they become so close to the courtiers and they are so reliant on that access to royal events for their reporting that what it means is that very often they are not reporting the truth. And I'm a big monarchist, right? I'm a big royalist. I still believe that stories that are in the public interest connected to the royal family should be covered. And very often you see the Royal Rota covering them up. And do you remember the whole phone hacking scandal was only ever blown out into the open because Tom Bradby was lending Prince William and Prince Harry ITN's editing equipment. That phone call was hacked by Glenn Mulcair, the then royal editor of the News of the World, and it was published. Now, of course, it was very much in the public interest that the phone hacking story came into the public domain. I would argue, Alex, that it is highly questionable as to whether Tom Bradby should have been lending ITN's editing equipment to two princes who he claimed he was meant to be impartially covering. Do you see the point that I'm making?
Oh, no, I do, but you're absolutely right. This is how the Royal Rota works. I'm sure even if he had reported it to his seniors, they'd have said, well, if it keeps you in with the princes, do it. And that is very compromised. That is how sort of, state-run media operates in deep and dark countries. Although I think a lot of the time in the higher echelons of journalism, there's a lot of mutual back-scratching between the powers that be and those people who are supposed to be speaking truth to power.
Alex Phillips, do stand by, because in just 1 minute, we are going to continue our countdown of the 50 worst people in the UK today. But first, I never recommend anything unless I truly believe in it. And today I've got something genuinely game-changing for you. Have you ever stopped to think about how crucial comfort is, especially down there? Well, let me tell you, today's Outspoken is proudly sponsored by Sheath Underwear, the revolutionary brand shaking up men's comfort across the globe. And here's what makes it even better. Sheath was founded by a US Army veteran, a brilliant guy called Robert Patton, while he was serving in Iraq back in 2007. That's right, this isn't just any underwear brand. It was designed for the toughest conditions imaginable. Patton was battling relentless heat and discomfort in full combat gear, and he thought there has to be a better way, so he created it. And let's be honest, traditional underwear just doesn't cut it anymore. Sheath's innovative dual pouch design ensures your comfort all day long, keeping things separate, cool, and fresh. Imagine your essentials being comfortably cradled away from unwanted friction and heat. Trust me, this is genuinely transformative. I have personally tested these at the gym, on long days at work, even just relaxing at home. And I'm telling you, once you've experienced Sheath, there's simply no going back. They're stylish, they're supportive, and they're designed to deliver unmatched comfort. It's actually like upgrading from economy to first class, but for your underwear. And right now, I'm offering you an exclusive 20% discount at www.sheath.com. Yes, that's 20% off your entire order when you use my special promo code Outspoken at checkout. So what are you waiting for? Sheath is the perfect present, by the way, if you're shopping for your husband, your boyfriend, your son, your brother, or your hard-to-buy best mate. And ladies, don't worry. Look at them. Female versions available online too. This is very exciting. I love this. Sheath is also the first official underwear brand of the UFC. So click the link below, enter Outspoken at checkout, and thank me later when you're feeling comfortable, confident, and ready to tackle anything your day throws at you. Sheath underwear, www.sheath.com, redefining comfort one pair at a time. But now, back to the show. Continuing. Our countdown of the 50 worst people in the UK. At number 32, up 3 positions, Chris Bryant, the Labour Shadow Minister for the Media. And it says something quite chilling about this Labour administration that the long-time loser, who once branded me a dangerous nutcase for campaigning against catastrophic lockdowns while defending the scientific concept of herd immunity, is now responsible in part for the regulation of the internet in the United Kingdom. Because trust me, Bryant is always on the wrong side of the argument. And unfathomably, given his behaviour, he was until last year the chair of the Commons Select Committee on Standards, but had to recuse himself over the Boris Johnson witch hunt because he prejudged the outcome. Thoroughly nasty, thoroughly unpleasant. He made all those false allegations about Nigel Farage in Parliament, about his connections to Russia, and is so gutless that he refused to repeat them outside the House of Commons. And Alex Phillips, I just find it really gross that this is the type of guy that's been rewarded with a ministerial position.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've had the displeasure of having done things like Question Time with Chris Bryant, who I've never met somebody who can sit and hold court talking about himself for so long. Strike me as an unpleasant person. He's one of those sort of bitter, nasty, vitriolic leftists who utterly despise the right wing, makes it very personal. And so you kind of have to question where this man's moral compass is a lot of the time. And so being given the role of, regulating the internet, which there's a whole load of concern out there about the impact on free speech, but there's also a whole load of concern out there about some of the moral integrity of content online. We know that kids are being pushed videos of self-harming. We know about the trans brainwashing and cultification that's gone on. We know about the dangers of unbridled pornography and little children watching it. And so there are some very difficult moral balancing acts to do, where you preserve the freedom of existence and freedom of speech for adults, but you also safeguard children. And so if someone's doing or in charge of that delicate work, you would hope they have a really venerable character, that, someone who can be proven to have, earned the trust of the public in being provable to be a decent person of integrity. And if you gave me a whole long list of people, I just wouldn't pick Chris Bryant out to be the man to be the bastion of any of that.
And remember, Alex, this is not a guy who can be trusted. He refused to issue a personal apology to Nigel Farage. Now, what he claimed in Parliament potentially had a real knock-on effect over the debanking scandal, because it was cited in the Coots case with Nigel Farage. And listen to how just totally out of whack his figures were. So he tried to claim that Farage was being paid by the Russian state and cited a £548,000 figure. In fact, Nigel had been paid well under £5,000, and it was not from the Russian state. It was because he made 2 minor appearances on the TV channel RT, which at the time, Alex, virtually everyone in Westminster was appearing on. It actually had a studio in Westminster. So I'm sorry, there's a big difference between £5,000 and £548,000. He corrected the record in Parliament, but he's such a nasty character. He refused to make a personal apology to Farage.
Yeah, and if Nigel was so inclined, he could have probably sued for defamation. Nigel could sue a lot of people for defamation, I'm sure, but is never that way inclined and never really litigates in that way. He just takes it all with the rough and tumble of politics. But this is exactly the sort of stuff I'm talking about. That is reprehensible. It doesn't particularly show balance. It doesn't particularly show integrity. It doesn't show caution. It doesn't show having a strong moral compass. And when it comes to things like monitoring the internet, regulating media, that is exactly what we need in the 21st century, when there are so many difficult things to grapple with, so many complex equilibriums as we move into, through the digital revolution into unknown territory. And Chris Bryant shouldn't really be anywhere near it.
No, indeed. At number 31, a new entry for Iqbal Mohamed, the pro-Palestine MP. Part of Jeremy Corbyn's independent alliance of sectarians, Mohamed found fame as the bloke who defended first cousin marriage in the House of Commons. Alex Phillips, a disturbing sign of what's coming, of what's ahead in British politics?
Sign of what's already here, and how gutless the Labour Party have been to do anything about any of it. And now they're pushing forward with legislation for Islamophobia. When this man stood up and essentially tried to defend incest in Parliament, we know that first cousin marriage, not only does it make our skin crawl and make us feel really creeped out, we also know that it comes with debilitating birth defects for the offsprings of those marriages. Very often it also comes involved with forced marriages as well. And so it should be something that is very clearly reprehensible. And yet this man, there he is, went out, won an election seat because of the Muslim vote. I always wonder how much of that Muslim vote is honest, how much is sort of messed with, let's say, meddled with, and uses sort of subcontinental practices in order to succeed. But we're just going to see a lot more of this in the next election, I'm afraid. And the Labour Party now want to introduce Islamophobia. And so what other topics, which are clearly morally reprehensible in a Judeo-Christian country, are going to be spoken about in Parliament as if they should be normalised, and as if trying to prevent them is some form of racial or religious hatred? I mean, it's deeply, deeply worrying. I think these people need to be scrutinised far more than they have been. The media have just had a hands-off approach. The media run around talking about the 4 Reform UK MPs as if this is sort of fascism of our time, the most dangerous thing that's ever happened in politics. I don't hear any of them looking into these pro-Gaza MPs, looking at their funding, looking at their belief systems, and actually asking very serious questions of what sort of threat they pose to our democracy.
Indeed, very, very good point. Oh, Alex Phillips, what a countdown it has been. Let's just run through that list so far. Number 40, Ed Balls. Number 39, Ava Santina. Number 38, Jonathan Reynolds. Number 37, Sangita Myska. Number 36, Lewis Goodall. 35, Ash Sarkar. 34, Donnachadh McCarthy. 33, Tom Bradby. 32, Chris Bryant. And 31, Iqbal Mohamed. Alex Phillips, so great to have you, and we'll be back to business as usual next week. But of course, there is no uncancelled after show this week because, as you might know by now, I'm on the Mark Stein cruise. But don't worry, we are back live for the after show from this Monday. So to watch from then, please do sign up to my Substack, www.outspoken.live. It is the best way to get the breaking news, join a thriving community, and communicate with me directly. There is a completely free option, and this is the best way to protect me against big tech censorship and ultimately cancellation. You know they want to cancel me. You've seen the lengths they've gone to cancel me. So I just ask you, all I ask you to do is sign up. It will only take 1 minute. It means so much to me. That's www.outspoken.live. But the countdown of the 50 worst people in the UK today continues tomorrow at 5 p.m. UK time, midday Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Click subscribe if you're watching on Rumble or YouTube. Most importantly, I promise to keep